Hey all! Before we get into the video, I'd like to shout out two channels that have followed me since early on in my YouTube journey. Skeptic Pork and An Atheist Snail's Journey both were commenters on my videos before my first jump in growth. They're smaller channels, but their content is still good, and they deserve to grow as they release more videos. Links to both of their channels will be in the description, and please check them out after this video. That said, on to everyone's favorite topic, politics. We hear it all the time. America is a Christian nation. And anyone with a basic knowledge of our history knows that one of the things that we tried to escape was religious persecution from both Protestant and Catholics in Europe alike. Pilgrims, Puritans, and other settlers left Europe to form their own communities on the then British-governed American colonies. And yet, once here, subsects of Christianity such as the Quakers, and even later the Mormons, persecuted and even hunted down in some instances. Somehow, it seemed our early forefathers managed to bring the religious persecution we so wanted to flee with them. Missouri Executive Order 44 essentially legalized the hunting down and murder of Mormons within the state in an effort to drive them from the state of Missouri entirely. That order was carried out in the early 1800s and wasn't lifted until the 1960s. This was an order that, in our Christian nation, allowed other people to hunt and kill their fellow Christians. Now, for the people jumping up and down preparing to type into the comments, "Mormons aren't real Christians!" then I would have to say that Mormon would say the same thing about Catholics, Baptists, Methodists, and any other denomination that isn't Mormon, effectively leading you all to commit a no true Scotsman fallacy. And you can't all be right. So from my point of view, if you believe Jesus is divine, then you're a Christian. And a Mormon or a Quaker is also a fellow Christian. Now, my personal belief is that everyone should have their own religious rights, as long as those rights don't infringe on the rights of others. So if a Muslim wants to pray in a mosque, fine. But the minute they want to impose a law that prohibits the eating of pork, that's not fine. If a Christian wants to pray in a church, absolutely fine. But the minute I'm told to have a time of prayer in schools, legally, I'm gonna have to say that that's absurd. Not even counting the fact that that infringes on the rights of other non-religious children and ostracizes them. It also creates an environment where each individual's method of prayer cannot possibly be recognized. For instance, let's have an imam lead a Catholic child in a prayer, or a Pentecostal lead a Baptist, or any Christian attempt to lead a Jewish child in a prayer. Go ahead, see what happens. In this regard, I have to take a firm stance on never giving religion an inch as far as politics are concerned, or any laws for that matter, because historically, religion will take a mile when given that inch. Don't believe me? Remember that the United States is a secular nation, founded in part to escape religious oppression. How, in this secular nation, is it fair for a non-believer, or a Hindu, or a Buddhist, or a Muslim, to have to use our nation's currency that has a creed written on it that none of those parties believe in? What about on police cars? Does that really make you feel safer, having a legally mandated "In God We Trust" written on a car? Or, if you're not a believer in that particular God, let's flip the table. What if you're a Christian, and you have "Allahu Akbar" written on the side of a police car when they pull you over? Would you feel safer? Or would you feel more insecure about your chances knowing about fringe groups like ISIS? When the switch is flipped, suddenly the situation will almost always feel incredibly different. Like asking for prayer in schools but having your Baptist child led by a Muslim imam, or vice versa. What are some other areas where religious beliefs infringe on the rights of others? What about gay marriage? Most of the arguments against gay marriage stem from an archaic adherence to a nuclear family model or a long-standing belief in religious doctrine. Christianity and Islam both have historically strong stances against homosexuality, and that has influenced legislation on the topic for years. Now, let's flip the switch again. What if we had only homosexual marriages be mandated by the government, and any type of breeding was strictly controlled, making heterosexual offspring producing relationships the minority? Suddenly, anyone opposing gay marriage would be fighting tooth and nail for their human rights instead, because that's what it boils down to, isn't it? It's just human rights. Suddenly, when you're not the one who has marriage legally mandated to you from the get-go, you're having to fight for your human rights, much like homosexuals have had to do historically. What about on the topic of slavery? There were many Christians who would use the Bible in order to say that slavery was a mandate by God, because there are many passages within the Bible that not only condone slavery, but even give you rules on how to enforce it. Now, remember early in the video when I pointed out that Mormons are Christians too, and then their rights are just as valid as any other Christian, so long as they don't impose on anyone else's rights? Let's take that one more step back. Now it's every religion, and they should have all the rights of any other. Well, what happens if we take that just one more step backwards? Suddenly, it's every human who should have equal rights. Unfortunately, in the United States, we are a secular nation, but we know that the reality is that we are a majority religious nation, especially when it comes to Christianity. Almost no atheist can get into a political office, because the overwhelming majority want their representatives to follow a faith of some sort, especially when the presidency is considered. Faith comes into conversation far too often. From our money, to our Pledge of Allegiance, to our public policies, we may be a secular nation, but somehow, we gave religion an inch, and it took many, many miles. I'd like to leave you all with one question. Who would you trust more with codes to nuclear weapons? Someone who believes we're all going to see each other, except for their enemies, in some kind of afterlife and live on forever after the world is destroyed? Or someone who knows that once they press that button, that's it. It's the end. It'll be their fault, and that weight will never leave their shoulders. Thanks for watching, everyone. Links to Patreon, Twitter, and my shoutouts will be in the description below. I'll see you all in the next one.